things will come together for him, but it'll just be slower. Most developmental theorists agree that a girl is done with her adolescence around 19 to 20. For a boy, it's 22 to 25. And I want that to be an encouragement to any parent listening, because I sit with a lot of parents of 15, 16, 17-year-old boys who are so worried, like, we've only got till 18. And I'm like, no. You've got until 25. Let's put the finish line at the right place so that we give him the room to grow and the space for things to come together that's appropriate to his developmental pace.
Hey friends, and welcome to the Paula Ferris Show. I'm your host, Paula Ferris. So glad that you are here today. Thank you for your feedback about last week's episode, the 3 steps to creating the life that you love. And hey, if there's something you want to talk about, hop into my DMs. That's how these conversations happen. That's how we're having the conversation today about how we can understand and support our tween and teen boys. And this is really based upon your feedback from a series that we did not long ago about how we can connect with our moody tween and teenage daughters. That was a series with my daughter Caroline and therapist Sissy Goff. So we're doing the same thing today with our tween and teen boys. Now, this is going to be a 2-parter. So today we're just going to really try to understand what the heck is happening to them in the different phases of development, how we can best support them. And then next week's episode, we're going to take your questions. It's purely Q&A. And my guest today is David Thomas. David Thomas is an incredible author. He's written several books, Wild Things, most recently Raising Emotionally Strong Boys, which I think is a must read for anyone that has boys in their life, whether they're sons, nephews, grandsons. Fantastic read. And he is a therapist. He is the executive director of Daystar Counseling and specializes in counseling boys and the families of boys. So I could cry tears of joy and relief after having this conversation with David, because I have to be honest, I struggle sometimes connecting with my boys. My middle guy recently said, "Mom, I don't feel like you really get me." And to be honest, I don't. But I feel like I understand him so much better after having this conversation with David Thomas. So here's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode, the need for supervision and oversight. We're going to talk about the different stages of development, what they need at different points in their life, why they open up at night, right? I mean, like, if I wanted to have my son in this conversation, we'd have to record it at 10:30. They get so chatty at night, but there's something that's happening at night, and David Thomas is going to break it down. We'll talk about why they're hardest on their moms, why they are, how we can best support them. I think it's just going to be a conversation that really gives you so much insight into what is happening in the boy brain. And then something really funny that came out of it is what happens collectively to their IQ when they get together. Such a great conversation. I hope it blesses you, it encourages you, it empowers you, and it makes you feel a little bit less alone. So without further ado, here's David Thomas. This is part 1 of our conversation about how we can best support and understand our tween and teen boys. David Thomas, I am so glad you're here. I have an enormous amount of respect for you, but I feel like you're going to provide some relief for all of us parents of tween and teen boys. Thank you for being here.
Paula, you are so kind. I've been looking so forward to this. We had you on our podcast and we wanted to turn it into a 6-part series. We just wanted to keep going and going and going. I enjoy your company so much.
Oh, is that because I just talked too much?
No.
That we had to split it up into 6?
No, you are that enjoyable. Thank you.
Oh, well, we had such a positive response to the episodes that we did with Sissy Goff, your counterpart at Daystar, and my daughter Caroline, that were like, we need to do one with tween and teen boys. So this is funny. Caroline joined us for that series about relating and connecting to our tween and teen daughters. So I invited my boys, who are 14 and 10. They're in school, but regardless, my 14-year-old, I said, "Do you want to join us?" And he goes like, "Sure." And then I said, "Were you going to have anything to say?" And he said, "Probably not." So I thought, you know what? We're not gonna force the issue here, because if I really wanted him to talk, David, and participate in this interview with you and I in this conversation, it'd have to be at 10 or 10:30 at night. I don't understand that. That's a thing? Why? Why did they start talking at 10:30?
That's a whole thing. Well, let me just say, I love that man's honesty. No, I don't think I'll have a lot to contribute at that time. That's fantastic. I respect that. And it amazes me how open they become at night. And, you know, Paul, if we were going to talk around the why, I would say that for us as males, this is not just true for adolescent guys, but for us as adult males, often eye to eye feels threatening. So where you as females could experience intimacy and connection in making eye contact, we can feel overwhelmed to the point that it shuts us down. And so it's why so many boys talk well at night. It's dark. I have so many moms who'll say, if I go in his room, he still will let me scratch his back. And it's amazing what spills out because he's looking the opposite direction. It's in the dark. It's why I will encourage moms, if you want to talk with him during the day, go outside while he's shooting hoops and just retrieve the ball, or go on a walk with the dog when he's not aware that he's talking and he's not having to make eye contact. Shoulder to shoulder feels a lot safer. So tuck that away.
That's so fascinating. It's the eye to eye. Okay, shoulder to shoulder. Yeah, I just don't understand it. I drive him to school most days. It's a 30-minute commute one way, and he will barely say a word. And it's like pulling teeth to get anything out of them. Okay, so that's good to know that there is an explanation behind it. And there really is, since we're talking about tween and teen boys and girls are so different. I mean, that's not breaking news. I liken it to girls are a heartache because they're drama and emotion and a little manipulation. Let's just be real. Boys are a heart attack. Like, I just don't want you to jump off the roof thinking you can fly, that you're invincible. That's, for me, the biggest difference between my daughter and my boys. Girls are a heartache and boys are a heart attack.
Okay, that's a title of a book right there. I want you to write that next. That's fantastic.
No, I'm not writing any more books. No more books, David. None. I'm done.
Well, if you change your mind, there's your title.
I told my friend, Courtney DeFeo, who has a wonderful podcast of her own, I said, I have had a literary hysterectomy. I've written 3 books. I'm done. I've shut the shop down. So, okay, so let's jump in. I want to know what is happening, or maybe what's not happening in the brain, the frontal lobe, the science behind it, the decision-making, the hormones. How does that affect their decision-making? And I'm going to share a quick story with you, because sometimes I think so many parents look at their boys and they're like, is anything connecting? Like, I feel like they're not firing on any cylinders. And I'll give you a classic example, and I have permission from my friend Jeannie Cunyon, who you know very well. She's the mother of 5 boys. 5 boys, y'all. And one of her boys, who will remain anonymous, was doing his laundry. Okay, but he didn't put it in the washer. He just put it in the dryer, thinking that would clean it. Like just skipped that whole cleansing part and threw it in the dryer. What is happening, or what isn't happening to the boy, the tween, and the teen brain? Help us make sense of it, because it doesn't make a lot of sense from this perspective.
It does not. And I would go all the way back to the beginning, because I'm going to define something that's true on the front side of boy development that will stay true to answer your great question.
Great.
I talk about the boy brain every time I teach on boys, because I think unless we allow that to serve as a backdrop, we can miss a lot with him. We can end up not parenting in tandem with the unique way that he's hardwired and designed if we don't. And so we know that a little girl's frontal lobes grow at an earlier stage and are more developed, which our frontal lobes inform a lot of things, our executive decisions. It helps us think rationally, manage our emotions, a lot of different important tasks. And it's a part of why girls tend to think first and then act second, which we'd all agree is a very logical series of events. Why boys tend to do more of the opposite, acting first and then thinking. Sometimes on my way to the ER, maybe I shouldn't have ridden my bike off that ramp. Maybe I shouldn't have just thrown my clothes in the dryer and skip the washer stage. There's a lot of acting before thinking that I would say is the summary statement to your great question.
And that's just how they're wired. But why? How does that serve them to act and then think? Like, why are they wired like that? The science behind it. How does that benefit them?
Where I would say I do think it benefits boys is I think we as males are action-oriented. We're good problem solvers. There certainly are females who have those strengths as well. Hear me say that.
Right.
But all of those things, I think, can come into play in some great ways in certain moments. Like, I think about the different heroic stories we've heard over the course of history, where I feel like that acting before I did a lot of thinking may have served some men well, but we know plenty of examples of where it did not as well. But all of that will come into play in development. It's just going to be a slower, longer process. In fact, I talk a lot about how, with the exception of gross motor, boys tend to be ahead in that thread of their development. Every other thread of development, girls are more oftentimes going to be leading their physical development,
Okay.
their emotional development, their social development. So things will come together for him, but it'll just be slower. Most developmental theorists agree that a girl is done with her adolescence around 19 to 20. For a
Right.
boy, it's 22 to 25.
Wow.
That's
That frontal lobe isn't
significant.
closing for a long time,
No,
right?
absolutely. And I want that to be an encouragement to any parent listening, because I sit with a lot of parents of 15, 16, 17-year-old boys who are so worried, like, we've only got till 18. And I'm like, no, 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 no. You've got until 25. Let's put the finish line at the right place so that we give him the room to grow and the space for things to come together that's appropriate to his developmental pace.
And you have a lot of experience in this space. You have a daughter who's in her early 20s, and then you have twin boys who I believe are 21.
You are correct.
So their frontal lobe is getting real close to closing, David.
And it's so fun to watch. And I've waited a long time to get there.
I bet. So knowing that they're wired this way, wired to act and then think, we can't change it. How do we best support it? How do we best nurture it? I don't know what to do with it, because the things that they do or don't do, they don't make a whole lot of sense. I'll be honest. I'm like, can you really be that simple? And yes, they are. So how do we respond to that science and that knowledge as parents? How do we support it? How do we foster it? How do we encourage them? How do we not get so frustrated?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I would say the first answer I'd give to that is that we do want to think about always offering more oversight and supervision to boys. I think we can set them up for failure when we don't, and then get really frustrated when something goes down differently than it might with our daughters. And hear me very clearly say, that's not to say girls can't find their ways to destructive moments, but I'll laugh with you about this, Paula. When we had my daughter, who's our firstborn, we were given one of those kits that a lot of new parents gets where, you plug up the outlets and you close up the cabinets, all those things. Well,
Yes.
in the chaos of it all, we somehow forgot to set that up. And when we moved a couple of years later, before my boys came, we found it. And I laughed with my wife, like, look at this. We never plugged things up, closed things down, and we didn't need it. When my boys came, it was like we could not lock down enough.
Oh, for sure.
These two wild creatures climbing and exploring everything. And that will continue all throughout. My daughter, it's fascinating to me as I've watched her growth and development and the independence that we afforded her at a different moment than we would have our boys. Now, it's not that I didn't give it to them. I'm just pacing that differently as a result. And if she had a group of friends over, I wasn't necessarily always feeling this urgency, like, I need to go check in. I need to make sure nothing's broken. I need to make sure, however I'd finish that sentence.
Okay.
Whereas with my boys, I had a hilarious mom of a teenage boy years ago. Here's a great little nugget, who said to me, when my son has friends over, I serve small bowls of queso. And I said, tell me more. And she said, so that I'm having to go back in the room and refill often. I serve beverages in small. Isn't that great? And she's like, I just want to bring a little more oversight to the situation. So I'm going to need to refill things a little more often. And she said, I didn't do that in the same way when my daughter had friends over. And I'm like, that's great insight right there, because we don't want them to accidentally find their way to some destructive places, which boys can do sometimes when they're not intending to. But, it's that age-old wisdom of when too many adolescent boys of a certain age come together, their collective IQ lowers. And so we want to be thinking in the wisdom of that.
Wait. Say that one more time, please. Just to let it soak in.
Let's just sit there. When too many adolescent boys of a certain age come together, their collective IQ can lower out of all of what we're discussing of this frontal lobe phenomena. And so how could we bring enough oversight and supervision to the equation?
I'm sorry. So it's not just me. And for those listening, it's not just you. It's a real thing. Oh my gosh. Okay. So this has been so helpful already. More oversight, more supervision for the boys. I want to ask you specifically, Sissy Goff is a huge proponent of the Enneagram for girls and how that will help you to understand your girls a little bit more and how they are wired. You're telling us how boys are wired, but each of them is going to have their own disposition and personality. Are you a fan of the Enneagram and getting to know your boy?
Oh, I'm a huge fan. And we use it within our practice daily in our work with parents and with kids. I think it's an invaluable tool. And I think with adolescents, we've discovered that sometimes that tool can help them work on some of the harder edges in a way that's more palpable. So it's rather than just saying, I struggle with this, it's like, all 9s struggle with motivation sometimes. All 6s struggle a little more with fear. And so I've seen a lot of young men get more motivated through that tool. I think it's a great resource.
My daughter and I feel like we can connect a lot more than my 14-year-old son, JJ, and it might just be the age. I know that 12 to 15-year age is challenging in and of itself. He told me last week, he's like, you just don't get me. And I didn't really know what to say to that. Like, how are we supposed to respond to that? Because I really, honestly, if I'm being true, I don't feel like I get him. I don't. And I don't know what to do about that, David.
Yeah. I'd say 2 things to that. First, you're 100% on target in your assessment of what's going on right now developmentally. Every developmental theorist would say that 13 to 15 is described as the worst episode of a boy's life. There will never be another point in development where he will be plagued by as much biological change that is accompanied by a lot of emotional intensity and relational complexity. It's a complicated point in development. He'll never feel as uncomfortable in his own skin, as unsteady, unsure of who he is. And I actually want that to be good news to parents of 13 to 15-year-olds listening. Like, if you found yourself losing hope in certain moments or worrying more about him in this space, I want you to be encouraged by knowing this is as complicated as it gets. Everything that comes after is easier and better. That's not to say it doesn't have its own version of hard, but it is to say it's not this hard. Everything that came before wasn't this complicated. So I'd say that first and foremost. And I would say, look for those moments when conversation ends in that way, if you don't understand me, as an invitation. I think it's great when parents in general, moms in particular, will say, you're right, buddy. I've never lived in the skin of a teenage boy. Or even if a dad is saying that, I have, but I've never done it in this day and time. Like, tell me, what's the hardest thing about being a teenage guy right now? I use that as an invitation for questions.
Okay, but do that shoulder to shoulder
Yes.
at night when they're willing to open up, right? It's
nailed
knowing
it.
the time and place to have that conversation. Because it's a struggle, and I do feel a little helpless, and I don't really know how to connect. One thing that I've done I had mentioned this with Sissy. I do this a lot with all the kids is I ask them, how can I support you right now? And I do that with my husband too, with my friends. How can I support you? And they'll usually open up. But I asked JJ that yesterday. He's like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, yes, sometimes it's just challenging. But if we can make it through this specific phase, right? This 13 to 15-year-old phase, we're good. So let's talk about those phases. You write in your book, Wild Things, that there are 5 stages of boy development. Let's go through a couple of them, specifically this tween and teen period. Talk about the development, what's happening with them. What are some of their triggers? What are their stresses? What is going through their mind? Are they narcissists like young tween and teen girls are? Like, is that a thing too? Sissy mentioned that girls are narcissists, and that's totally normal because it's part of the emancipation and becoming independent and thinking about yourself, because you will be on your own soon. Yeah. So what's going on in these stages, the tween and the teen stage?
I think it's so important that we lean into this, because I think it can normalize a lot of things that can feel concerning or overwhelming. And thank you for mentioning Wild Things. It was one of my favorite parts of doing that book, was breaking down boy development. And I talk about stage 3, stage 4, and stage 5 as the adolescent years. And that's kind of pre, mid, and late adolescence. Now, what's important to note to what I commented a little bit earlier is that Sissy was able to cover all of girl development in 4 stages. And so again, guys are needing that extra stage to finish out. But in stage 3, kind of that pre-adolescent stretch, he's just starting to really search for masculinity. Around 9 to 10, actually, a boy's brain begins to look pretty deeply into what it means to be a man. And so he's thinking about things more at that point than any other point. He's also evolving, he's growing, he's needing more information at that point. That's a really foundational piece. In fact, Paula, if you'll let me mention, the data used to tell us that most boys had their first exposure to internet pornography somewhere between 11 and 14. The new data says 9 to 12.
Wow.
Yeah. And we can't lean in far enough.
9 to 12? My
9
youngest
to
is
12.
10. That breaks my heart.
It does mine too. And it's kind of back to that oversight and supervision. I couldn't begin to tell you the number of parents who've come in and printed off a history or handed me a device, and we tracked back to look at the original search word or question. And often it's a really normal question. Like, he's wondering about his body, other bodies. And we, in my experience, don't do as great a job of talking with the boys we love about their evolving, growing, changing bodies as we do with the girls we love. And I think it's a part of why,
True.
what do we all do in this day and time when we wonder about anything? We Google it. And so I'm never surprised when boys take the questions there if we're not talking enough. And so those would be a few things that I would say about stage 3 boys and where we really want to arm him with some good information. I also talk a lot with stage 3 boys about giving them some outlets to test their strength. Sports are a great outlets to test their mind. Obviously, school's going to do that. But even in the summer, like reading, learning a new instrument, those sorts of things, outlets to feel risk and adventure. I think that's hardwired into who we are as males. And then an outlet to feel purpose. I want to flood boys. I think we as males are hardwired for purpose. And so anytime he can come back and help coach a younger sibling soccer team, anytime he can tutor a kid in a subject he's strong in, anytime we as families can be about volunteering and outreach, it just feeds this part of who he is developmentally it's just so needed and necessary.
So that's stage 3.
That's stage 3.
Pre-adolescent.
That
years.
is. So that's kind of the 9 to 12
9,
space.
10. Okay. All right.
Kind of 9 to 12. And then I jump into what I call the wanderer stage, which is 13 to 17. And everybody fasten your seatbelt as I say what I'm about to say. This is that complicated stretch.
I got to take notes. I got to take notes. So start that over again.
All right. So
stage 4. Okay.
Stage 4, the wanderer. This is 13 to 17. And Paula, I'll preview it by saying this. I did an interview one time about that book, and the interviewer asked me, he goes, okay, when would you say that a stage 3 boy, the boy we just talked about, is at his best? And I said, he's at his best when he is outdoors and unplugged. And he said, when would you say a stage 4 boy is at his best? And I said, when he is employed and exhausted from a sports practice. He's his best self because we're plugged into purpose again. We've got these good outlets in place. So if I were to say a couple of things about a stage 4 boy, back to what I mentioned, I'd say he's in biological chaos. He is experiencing 5 to 7 surges of testosterone pouring through his body a day, not a week, not a month. And that's going to wreak havoc on the poor guy's system. And we're going to see evidence of that where he's growing hair on his lip and different parts of his body. We're going to smell evidence of that. Teenage boys have a really special scent after a sports practice. They do. Mm-hmm, and we're going to experience evidence because he's going to be a little more withdrawn. He's at times going to be more arrogant and argumentative. I laugh about this. I read this. Mark Tween wrote this in Old Times from the Mississippi. He said, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant, I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I turned 21, I was astonished at what he had learned in 7 years. And so to your great question about the narcissistic years, I think that's when it shows up for him. Like he is in moments convinced we just don't know a lot. We don't understand his world. We don't get anything. And that will shift. That absolutely will shift. But what I'd say in summary to all those things to define stage 4 boys is that he's individuating. He's separating out. He's becoming his own person. He's finding his own voice. And in almost 30 years of doing this work, Paula, I would say that that process for stage 4 boys is more clumsy than clean. He's going to be fumbling the ball more than he's going to be carrying the ball down the field. And we do him a great service when we don't define him or the relationship by what we're seeing. So think on it with that analogy. If I had a long sports career, I don't want that career to be defined by a handful of games where I fumbled the ball. Like, could we look collectively at all of what's true about me as an athlete? And so we're not going to make any long-term decisions. In fact, I was with a mom not long ago, and she has a 14-year-old son who's in a hard moment. And she's in a discouraged statement said to me, David, he is never going to. And I said, okay, time out right there. I'm not even going to let you finish that sentence because whatever you're about to say, we don't know that that's 100% true. I looked at her and I said, I don't know about you, but I don't want to go down in history as who I was as a 14-year-old boy. No one who knew me thought I would be a therapist at 14.
Yes.
Everybody thought I needed a therapist. No one thought I'd be one because I wasn't done developing. And so we want to hold on to those realities.
This is so good. It is so helpful too. Well, this is incredibly helpful. Okay, so that's stage 4. And then stage 5 is...
Okay, this is where the really good news comes in because there is this significant shift that happens in stage 5 that I call the warrior stage. And
Okay.
this is boys roughly between 18 and kind of the mid 20s. So that 22 to 25 stretch. And what I want to even say before jumping in here is to say, I see a lot of boys start to shift into the beginnings of this goodness around 16 and a half, 17. So any parent listening who has a son in that space, get excited. And that's not to say everything comes together, but it is to say there starts to be a real shift. He's developing some abstract thinking so he can start to see us as a person and not just a parent. It's like, I'm no longer just a guy who drives him from point A to point B and makes meals and helps with laundry. It's like, I can't tell you the number of 17-year-old boys who I have will ask their mom questions like, hey, what's going on with you? And it's like, oh my goodness, didn't even notice she noticed I was feeling or experiencing anything that he'd not asked in that same way in the 13 to 15 space because he was so self-absorbed, self-consumed, insecure and uncomfortable in his skin that he can do that differently now. Paula, you mentioned I have 2 boys in this stage. I love watching them interact with my wife in this stage because it's beautiful to watch the way moms and sons can relate differently in stage 5 than they can on the front side sometimes of stage 4. And I can't tell you the number of moms I've had over the years who've said to me, David, I'm having a hard time with sending him off because I just started liking him again. You know, it's like he's so doggone enjoyable and now it's time to send him off. And like, I know, but watch what happens when he comes back. I talk a lot about the summers of the stage 5 years. I think the summers of the college years are honestly every bit as important as what he's learning during the academic year. So I want him doing internships and practicums, working at a camp and giving himself away, going on missions trips, having opportunities to grow and learn and expand as he is becoming more of just who he's designed to be. And it's fun to watch boys in this space. I love it.
This is so, I just feel like I have a lot of hope right now. And that whatever we're walking through as parents, it's very normal and very typical for these particular stages. Now, with girls, I know girls are always going to be hardest on their mom. The pendulum, they're going to kick off of us because it's a safe space. They know they can come back to us. What about the boys' relationship? How is the dynamic different with mom versus dad? Who are they tougher on? That might be a tough question to ask, but who do they relate more to and who has the more complicated relationship or who are they tougher on?
It's actually a tough question to answer because I don't want to say what I'm about to say, but I want to be honest in saying I think they're harder on moms, and I wish that weren't the case. I think it's a really unfair gig for moms with daughters who are pushing off and with boys who are separating out. And in my newest book, I talk a lot about kind of 3 tasks that moms have in that separating out stage. And it's the task of being safe. And when I say being safe, that does not mean he gets a permission slip to be as disrespectful as he will be in certain moments or just unload everything on you. But I talk about what does it look like for moms to be a sounding board, but not a punching bag. Like, I don't want you being a verbal punching bag, but I want you to be a sounding board. That's part of being safe. And I think the second task, Paula, is letting go and knowing that for him to move through his masculine journey, he does have to separate out from all things feminine for a time. And then again, you just heard me say he'll come back to relationship. And I want to be clear in saying it's not that you ever stop having relationship. It just means, to your great wisdom in asking that question, knowing with girls, they're going to have to push off at times. And it doesn't mean I did anything wrong. And as he's separating out, if moms can listen in on this moment and say, okay, he's just needing to move headstrong toward all things masculine. And that's going to mean our relationship will look and feel a little different for a time. And then go right back to what I said about stage 5. And Paula, if I could share this just real quick. Years ago, I read a great book called The Art of Family. It was written by a woman named Gina Bria, and it was maybe one of the best definitions of mothering a son I'd ever heard. She had 2 sons, and she said, I want my sons, both of them, to know from me that they are free to be rooted in home and still be abroad in the world as men. And I remember just sitting in that definition thinking, that's it. Like, free to be rooted in home is that being safe. Abroad in the world of men is that letting go. And I think the letting go part also involves the third task. So I talked about being safe, letting go. The third task, I think, is staying steady. Because if, as a mom, we fall apart every time he's in some of the separating out or closing up or won't share a lot. And we act like we're just a puddle in those moments. I don't think he feels the steadiness and the strength he needs, the security he desperately needs. And it's when I've laughed with a lot of moms over the years and I said, this 13 to 15 might be a great time to get a dog, because then, somebody's always excited to see you. You always got somebody to cuddle with. And so I would even add to that, you want to have great friendships in place so that in those moments you've got a good sounding board. I even love the wisdom of moms having friends who are maybe 5 years ahead of them who can preview the good of what's coming. And I think that's vital. I always say to stage 4 moms, find a friend who has a son in stage 5 and let her preview for you the goodness that's coming in the hardest moments of what you're living.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, they don't, again, Mom, you don't get me. You don't understand me. He stops asking for me to, like, every night he used to come and, hey, Mom, come tuck me in. He doesn't ask for that as much anymore. And now I'm dealing with that with my daughter too. I feel like she doesn't need me. And so I feel like I'm a little clingier with my 10-year-old, the baby, because he still needs me.
It's easy to do. Absolutely.
Oh, it gets harder. I mean, for the parents with littles, it's physically exhausting. The older your kids get, I almost feel like they need you more in an emotional, mental, spiritual aspect. And that's where the drain is, because you start carrying the burdens of your children. And those relationships get a little bit more complicated. With stage 3, stage 4, and stage 5, you have mentioned that there's a couple of questions that we can ask our boys. What causes them stress? How do you manage it? Where do you go for support?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about these questions that we can ask in a moment, that the right moment, right? Not when it's eye to eye contact, but maybe a moment where they feel a little safer if it's shoulder to shoulder, or we're out, rebounding the ball. It's not direct eye to eye contact.
You are so on target, and it's got to be the right moment. And I think the mistake we make is often asking boys, whether it's those questions or any question, when he's in a heightened state, an amped up moment emotionally. And I think he's flooded. And again, if his thinking brain is offline, he can't think rationally, he can't manage his emotions. So I think it's a gift to say to boys things like, you know what, I can tell you're swimming in a lot right now. Let's talk later. Or even when you pick boys up from school, I challenge a lot of moms to say things like, you know what, I can't imagine how hard you've been working today. Cognitively, relationally, like on every level. Do you want to drive home and just listen to music? Giving him that option to say, I've given a lot. I've given a lot mentally. I've given a lot relationally. And I could use some time just to relax and have some downtime. And then when we return with questions, I do love asking boys those 3 questions, because stress is universal. And I want boys to be figuring out when it registers in the body. And that's a lot of what my new book is about. It's just helping boys make better connections. And then figuring out, what do I need to do to regulate? I talk about 3 R's: recognize, regulate, and repair. And recognize and regulate are all what those 3 questions are about. How can I pay better attention to when I experience stress, and that my body is giving me signs and signals for that? Kind of like the dashboard of a car. Our cars are going to tell us when we need to add air in the tire, gas in the tank, check engine light. And as long as I pay attention to those things and attend to the vehicle, it keeps running. It turns out our bodies are the same. And then figuring out, what do I need to do to manage that stress? And Paula, let's have a hard conversation for just a second. Adult men in this world lead the statistics for internet pornography, for infidelity, for substance abuse, and suicide. Some of the scariest things out there. And the common denominator with all 4 is a male's attempt to try to numb out or shut down whatever he's feeling. And so those 3 questions, those 3 R's, are all about, how can I get more connected with what I'm feeling so that I don't end up trying to numb out whatever I'm experiencing, but navigate what I'm experiencing. And so I talk a lot about the difference between naming and navigating and numbing. And males are Olympic gold medalists at numbing if we don't help them develop the skills of naming and navigating. Numbing
versus navigating.
Yes,
that's
it's
brilliant.
key. And that's why, again, I think adult men keep leading those scary stats year after year, because often we're not helping boys develop those skills along the road of development. And I love that famous quote by Frederick Douglass, who says, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I believe wholeheartedly in that. It's why I want to do the work I'm doing. It's like,
so good.
If we can equip boys with these 3 R's and asking those questions, and they know the answers on the front side, then they don't have to land in the middle of those scary stats, because they've been practicing all throughout development, paying attention when they feel stressed, figuring out what to do with it, and who are their people. And I would really want to challenge any dad listening right now and any mom listening to challenge your husband that over the years, I have asked a lot of boys of a lot of ages, like, who are your mom's closest friends? And in my consistent experience, boys can immediately, instinctively tell me at least one or two, if not four or five. If I flip it and I say, who are your dad's closest friends? Paula, I can't tell you how often boys pause and sometimes can't name one.
Wow.
And often can't get to two. And I think that's on us as men. Like, we don't do a great job of modeling, here's what it looks like to live in relationship the way we were designed to be in relationship.
That's right.
And to experience accountability and to talk about where I'm stressed. And, it's in keeping with when I did the research for my newest book, it was fascinating, not surprising, but to see the stats around how many women go every year for their well visit with their doctors versus men who don't. And that's but one example of we don't attend to our physical health well. We don't attend to our relational health well. We don't tend to our spiritual health often well. And you as women often do instinctively. And it's why I think you don't lead some of those scary stats. And so I really want to challenge dads as you think about asking your sons that third question, are you living out that third question? Who are your people?
So good. Mm-hmm. So again, the 3 questions: what causes you stress? Number 2, what do you do to manage it? How do you manage it? And number 3, where do you go to for support? Finding that community. That is brilliant and so good. And it's a great conversation starter.
I agree.
With your boys too. I hope you're getting so much from these conversations. I know I do. I'm learning so much from them. And again, these conversations are the ones that you're having in your own homes, and you're asking me to have them. And it would really bless me if you guys could take a moment out of your day to rate the show, to write a quick review so we can keep having these really important conversations. Here's what I took from this conversation with David Thomas. The stages of development. Ages 9 to 12, they need to be connected. They need to be unplugged. Ages 13 to 17, exhausted and employed. And the runway doesn't end when they're 18. We have until 25 for those frontal lobes to close. So for any parent out there, grandparent, anyone that has a young man in their life and they're like, he's going off to college, it's over. It's not. We have until 25. So that gave me a lot of hope too. And as a parent, talk to somebody that has a kid in that older stage too, to see it gets so much better, just for some encouragement. And again, the frontal lobe is in charge of managing emotions, thinking rationally, and the executive decision. So such great info. John was not part of this conversation, but he listened to it and he's like, that was almost a masterclass. There was so much good information. He packed so much into that conversation. David, thank you for joining us. I'm going to link to all of his resources, including his most recent book, which he mentioned, called Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. I think it's a must read if you have boys in your life. And next week, totally dedicated to you. You sent me so many of your questions, and these questions range from heavy and hard to lighter questions. So we're talking about porn, we're talking about body shaming, we're talking about gaming, phones, consequences, weed, drugs, all of it. These are all your questions. It's an episode completely dedicated to the questions that you have about raising tween and teen boys. That's next week as we continue to talk about it. Thanks for joining, everybody. I'll see you next week. I know you guys thought you were done with me, but not quite yet. I have one more thing to tell you about. If you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe to the show. I don't want you to miss a single beat or a single conversation. And remember, my DMs are always open. Tell me what you want to talk about.